Hi and welcome to Nurture Your Zest. I'm your host, Ashleigh King, and I will bring you a wealth of interesting people with fascinating ideas across the tech industries, the creative industries, and also uplifting stories of courage and hope. We all go through prickly situations in life. I believe that through courage, creativity, and curiosity, you can find inspiration to nurture your zest. That thing that gets you up and out of bed every morning, the thing that lifts you up and lights up your day. So join me in the studio and let's see who we have in the hot seat today. Hello and welcome to Nurture Your Zest. I am so excited today because I've got a fabulous guest with me on the sofa. I've got Nic Redman, who is an incredible author and podcaster herself, and I can't wait to share her with you. So thanks for joining us. Hi, Nic. Hi. Oh my gosh. So I'm so excited to talk to you because I just love hanging out with you whenever I get to see you.
Ditto.
Yeah.
Ditto.
And I'm excited because I feel there's big partnerships coming up in the future. But I also know that people who've never heard of you are in for a treat. So I want to say, first of all, that we met on a panel for Janet Murray.
Oh my God.
For the Courageous Content Conference she was doing. And it was so funny because we didn't know who either of each other were, and there was other people on the panel, and it was actually really fun.
Yeah, and I made a beeline for you because I was like, podcasting, this is great. But then also that conference has like followed me around because somebody took a picture of me, because as I do, I tend to get everybody up doing voice exercises, and there's this picture of me where it looks like, it looks like I'm not doing a voice exercise. I've got the microphone here and I've got my bum stuck out. Yeah. I think I was getting everybody to like roll their hips around or something. It's a very dodgy picture. So that's my legacy from that conference, is looking like a complete idiot.
Oh, I love it. But it's also my first picture with you, and it's so lovely to have a candid photo where it's not something that you've posed or a selfie. You know, it's actually like we're in action doing what we love, telling people about podcasting and our voice.
It's a fun panel.
Yeah, it was a fun panel. So yeah, welcome today.
Thank you very much.
I've done a bit of a like, woo, this is how we met, but can you tell people listening or watching who you are?
Yes. My name is Nic Redman.
Yeah.
Shall I to camera this?
You can do it however you want, or you can chat to me.
First video podcast.
Chat to me.
Tell you.
Yeah.
So I'm Nic Redman, and I am a voice coach and a voice director. So I help people who create podcasts, who speak in public, who are pitching, who want to use their voice in a more confident, easy, expressive way. I'm basically a massive voice nut. And I really love speaking on the microphone because there's something about microphones that really freak people out. And I get it, but I've been on the microphone for about 20 years as a voiceover artist and a podcaster. So now I bring my voice coaching and my love of the microphone together, and I specialize for people on microphones mostly.
I love that. And I think it's such an important thing for us to think about our voice as a signature of who we are. It says so much. It's something I've found since becoming a podcaster, and I can hear it with my own voice now. I can tell when people are thirsty or when they're anxious, or there's much more slight intonation changes that I can notice than I could before I became a podcaster. And I would imagine as a voice coach, you can tell so much about a person when you're meeting them. If you meet someone at a networking event, are you doing like a psychoanalysis of their voice? Do you find yourself doing that?
Like a Sherlock, you know, when Shirley, boop, 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 boop,
yeah,
boop,
you're thirsty. Like, you ate crisps 2 hours ago.
It is a bit like being a detective, yeah. Part of the training on my master's degree for voice studies and vocal pedagogy was diagnostics in a way.
Right,
Functional diagnostics, as in voice use rather than clinical.
Yeah.
Although there were certain exercises that allow us to say to clients, you need to see your doctor first and then come back to me. So, you know, in that sense. But yeah, a lot of it is me being able to tune into someone's voice and analytically think, okay, what's going on here? I can hear tongue tension. Is that to do with the breath? Is it to do with the jaw? Is it to do with a crisis in their life? Like, what is going on? So there is an element of diagnostics. And I suppose it's like anybody who has a career that involves people. There is always, it's always hard to turn it off. But then I know that every time I speak to somebody at a networking event or whatever, and I say I'm a voice coach, they're like, oh my God, are you listening to my voice? Are you like judging my voice? I'm like, no, I'm enjoying your voice. I'm hearing your voice. There's always areas for opportunity, but yeah, there is an element of diagnostics. I used to coach accents as part of my job for actors, and one of my party tricks used to be sitting in the corner with a pint of beer and everybody just saying, do this accent, do that accent, do this accent, do that accent. But luckily I don't have to deal with that anymore because I don't coach accents anymore.
I mean, I think that must be such a fun part of the job to do. I'll never forget being about 13 and doing the wolf in Little Red Riding Hood. I used to always get the character parts. Like I always think of myself as a nice person, but I would always get the meanest parts to play. And I would always be like, what is this about? I don't know if it's just, I don't know. I don't know why I always got the mean parts, but with the wolf, I had to do a caterwaul, like a growl, like ow kind of thing,
really
and it was
primal.
So hard to actually tap into that. And I had some vocal coaching to do that, and it was really fun. But I just think accents and being able to change your voice and mimic things is such an incredible skill and gift that we maybe don't think about so much anymore. You know, now we have access to the TV. We all have more global accents anyway. But I'm thinking about the storytelling and the journey of storytellers over centuries and centuries, being able to mimic noises or different voices or accents. That is such a powerful gift. So I'm so thrilled that you've got that gift. What would you say for yourself in terms of your voice? Do you see your ability to use your voice and help others to use their voice? Is that a gift for you?
Yeah, I suppose so. Gift is an interesting one because it's not where I thought I would end up. I started as a performer. That was always my dream. But when I reflect on my childhood, I was often doing silly impressions of people and always doing a skit that involved voice. Like when I was young, like literally 4 or 5 or 6, one of my party tricks was doing, you might not remember this, but the voice of Victor Meldrew from...
yes, from Mrs. Bouquet.
Keeping Up with Appearances. Yeah, I used to do that, and I used to do. For a 6-year-old girl, it's a bit weird.
Yeah.
From Ireland, and I used to also do Lloyd Grossman, the original MasterChef guy.
Wow,
totally ridiculous, but like silly things like that. And I was always doing impressions of teachers and things. So there was definitely a seed of voice way back then. I just kind of went a bit of a wonky path, but it all led me, I suppose, to where I am today.
So I'm always interested in the wonky paths.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear anything you want to share about your personal wonky path. But for me, I think one of the things I love to do in the studio and with the work we do is unlock people's voices and stories. So I just get so excited with the skills that you have and the gifts you have. But yeah, tell me about your wonky path. So what would you say has brought you to where you are and what you're doing now?
Right. So I was what a lot of people refer to as a twirly, which is a West End Wendy. And that was my dream. That's what I wanted from a little girl. So I was always doing an extra show. I was always at dancing. I was always at singing because I wanted to be in musicals in the West End. It literally got to the point where I was doing my A-levels at school, and you were supposed to do 4 or 5 A-levels at school, and I only wanted to do 3 because I was also doing like 3 shows that year outside of school, and I had to go to my headmaster and do this big presentation about why, for me, all those shows was like my 4th A-level. So like that's how seriously it was from tiny. And then I got there, I went to uni, and then I went to London, and I eventually made my way to the little toe of the West End doing a transfer from a fringe show. And it was just like the whole thing was just not what my little girl dream had expected. I bumped up against a lot of, your voice is great, but you're too tall for this role. Your voice is great, but you're a bit young for this one, actually. Oh, in 20 years, you'll really come into your own. You'll really be a great character actress. Like my voice was very what you would call juvenile lead, which is like high and sweet and lovely, but my physicality and my character were not. So those roles go to like 5'2", 5'3", petite little things. And I'm not that. Things are different now, getting different, thankfully. But back then I wasn't where I thought I would be. I was playing the character roles, or, you know, I was doing the 3 parts that they in one. I was multi-rolling a lot and doing all that kind of stuff. So I was like, this is fine, but I'm not massively fulfilled. So at the same time, part of where I'd been to drama school was getting a voice reel, and I didn't really think about it, but I did a voice reel for being a voiceover and sent that off to a few people. Anyway, I got a call. Someone was like, we need a Northern Irish voice. So I tootled along. They were going to give me like basically my weekly salary in the West End for like one job, which was amazing.
Wow. For
that time. I was like, well, I'm definitely going to do that. So I headed along to this studio in West London and did this voiceover. It was for the televisions that you see in doctor's surgeries, you know, giving information.
Yeah.
I remember it so clearly. And I got that, pretended I knew what I was doing. And I was like, this is terrifying. But I went in and I sat down and I did the job in like 10 minutes. And I came out and the guy was like, that was great. Well done. And I was like, oh my God, thank goodness. It was my first time. And he was like, wow, you did really well. And he talked to me a bit about the industry and how it works. And I was like, there was a moment in that booth where I was like, this is all about my voice. Nobody cares how tall I am, or how big my boobs are, or what size dress I wear, or, you know, it was just my voice. And that was so exciting to me. So at that time, I was also dabbling in stand-up. So I was doing stand-up and I thought, well, I'll just see if I can do more of this voiceover stuff. So I followed that. I did what I do, which is basically start talking to people, forming relationships, networking, and like getting the information I needed in order to do that. And I started voiceover and then stand-up comedy. And that was great. I really finding my feet. Anyway, then I just got completely obsessed with the voice. And I went back to the drama school. I'd done Royal Central School of Speech and Drama to do a second master's degree, which my mum was livid about. I was like, another one. And that was in voice studies and vocal pedagogy. And that was like basically the only kind of official training to be a voice coach. And at the time I didn't realize, but it was like a world-renowned course that's very hard to get into. And I just kind of tootled in and was like, I do this and I'm a voiceover and I'm a stand-up and I'd love to do this. And I know nothing about voice, but I'm really curious. And they obviously saw something in me and took me in. It was great. It was the final piece of the puzzle because I didn't realize I never had the desire to like be a coach or a teacher at all. I'd never taught anything to anyone really. I just loved voice and was really passionate about it. And I remember at one point on that course, there was, we had to do this micro teach thing where you have to basically teach your peers something for 5 minutes. I've never been more nervous in my life. Now, granted, I'd done stand up to rooms of 300 drunks all over the country. Like I knew what nerves were and I knew how to deal with it, but I was so nervous. So I did this little exercise and I basically learned word for word, like a script, like an actor, what was going to say. And I did the thing. And then I just bawled my eyes out. It was such an adrenaline rush. And I was like, oh, that's the first time I've taught anybody anything. And I was like, that's interesting. And that's a challenge. And that kind of just like sort of took me on the path. I just kind of kept going. But it was hard because it was more of an academic degree than I'd ever done before. So that's when I got diagnosed with dyspraxia during that degree. My third degree, finally, someone's like, something a bit funny about why you keep bumping into things. But it was a good journey, and it was the final piece in the puzzle, really.
There's so much I want to comment on there. First of all, dyspraxia. That's so interesting. So, I know something about dyspraxia because I have attention deficit hyperactivity, ADHD myself, and I suspect dyscalculia, which is more around money, time, and directions.
Yeah.
What I know of dyspraxia is it can affect your sense of space and movement.
Yep.
But how does it affect you in terms of ordinary life or academic routes? What kind of impact do you think it might have had on your career?
Well, ultimately nothing, because I didn't know until I was like 25, 26, I suppose. So I had no idea. And I did so much dancing. I mean, I was dancing 4 or 5 times a week when I was a kid. So when I went through the diagnosis process, the lady was like, so do you find you have issues with coordination? And I'm like, well, I bump into things and stuff, but I just sort of be careful going through doorways, and I'm really kind of, I'm just a bit more careful. And what she said was that a lot of the things that I've accidentally done in my life, like dancing, like having to learn loads of lines for plays, all that kind of stuff, has probably managed the symptoms for me that I've not noticed, because some of it's memory.
Okay.
And the bumping into things is funny because I have broken my little toes a lot because I sort of don't know the width of myself when I go through doorways. And the one that it affects my life a bit more because my husband gets really annoyed because anytime he talks to me and I want to listen and really hear him, I have to turn like the radio or the telly off. And he's like, turn the fun off. I need to talk to you. So I have to make it really, just turn all the extraneous noise off.
Oh, I totally resonate with that. I feel like I always have at least 15 different channels in my head I can tune it into.
Yeah.
Which sounds a little concerning, I guess, to have voices in your head. But with ADHD, there's always so many the internal hyperactive noises so much. So I totally resonate with you when you need to be able to concentrate on something. I feel that if I go into a cafe or a bar, I can pick up on people's stuff, like this person's getting divorced, this is happening here, and it's like, how did you know that? Well, I heard it. You know, I can listen to multiple tracks at once, but it's very distracting if I want to give someone my full attention.
You're the ultimate eavesdropper.
Yeah, not intentionally. I'm like, get your stuff away from me.
Well, I'll know to be careful then what I'm saying around you.
Yeah. I want to say, I think your voice is incredible. I think it's amazing that you got into such a prestigious school and didn't even realize. And to me, that is such a testament to how much that was your path and that was what you were meant to do, and how cool that you know the ins and outs of voices and like how we work and how we can heal our voice. And I just heard, as I said that, my voice changed its tone there quite a lot. I think one thing I wanted to ask you, so I'm a new mum. I know you've been a mum, or you are a mum, sorry.
Still going.
Still going.
Still doing my best.
I'm so inspired by you, because pre-baby, like when you did an awesome workshop for us, it was like, right, I can't do this day, but my childcare on this day is going to be this type of thing, and this variable needs to be like this. And I didn't really get it, and I get it, and I get it, and I'm so grateful for you, for your ability to like step in and do stuff with your diary. But one of the things I was going to say is, for me and my voice, I used to get paid about £800 a month for paid speaking, and it was great. Every month I had like regular income. I was doing lots of talking on stages, panels, hosting things, and teaching, training. It was fantastic. When I first found out I was pregnant, I can't watch the productions I used to do. So I used to do business training, and I would do it live on YouTube. But actually, in the last few sessions, my voice sounds so stressful. It sounds like I'm really, really anxious. And I wasn't feeling anxious. I was like properly medicated for my ADHD and all these other things that I try to like carefully manage variables. But I just sound so stressed and anxious. And those episodes are so embarrassing to me. I never had any complaints from the listeners or viewers, but it's almost like being pregnant, all of my resources were being redirected to growing a baby. So I had no oxygen. So we're trying to stand and speak, but there was no vocal capacity or energy or range there. And now I'm sure I could have managed that better with warm-ups and better vocal protection and things you can do. But can you tell us a little bit, like, why did that happen to me? And can I get my voice back? Can I get back on stage?
Yeah, those babies fucking take everything, don't they?
Yeah.
From the minute they go in there. So with vocal support and the strength that you need to produce voice in a confident, expressive, engaging, like full tone way where it feels nice and free and open and not kind of sort of a bit unsupported and kind of not weak, but sitting back in the voice. Your diaphragm and your abdominal muscles are really important for that. Basically, there's the lowest layer, and this is where the nerd comes out.
Please let the freak flags or the nerds fly. Like
nurture my nerdy zest.
Yes.
The lowest layer of the abdominals, the transversus abdominis, which is it's interdigitates with the diaphragm, has to be able to release and engage to sort of control the movement of the diaphragm as the air comes out, because to make voice you have to have a nice consistent airflow.
Okay.
So the vocal folds can vibrate nicely. When you're pregnant, your abdominals are absolutely like having all the time off. They're stretched, they're out, sometimes they even split. So you don't have access to that instinctive vocal support process. So for a normal human, a normal non-voice nerd human, you don't realize that actually the main muscle that you need to support your voice is kind of out of action because it's massive and stretched.
Right.
So you can't really support your voice in the same way. Added to that, your body is full of baby. And I do think we take that for granted. So all the organs are kind of shifting around and moving. That also means your diaphragm can't really descend as much as it might want to in order to take a good breath for speech. So there's all kinds of things happening down here that definitely affect your ability to speak in the same way. I completely remember it. Like I was teaching voice 20 hours a week in like drama school in Liverpool when I was pregnant. and, you know, like trying to roll around the floor and like teach people all this voice, like quite practical voice. And I was also working as a voiceover artist. So I was both trying to teach it and use my voice every single day as a voiceover artist while pregnant. And it was intense. So you're very normal. There's nothing wrong. And yes, you can get back to it, was the question you asked, wasn't it?
Well, that is great, because I'll tap you up for a chat about that separately. But that's so good to hear, because it kind of explains things for me. I just felt like, what is going on? I'm not nervous, but I sounded so different. I actually also, being a podcaster myself, talk to lots of people, and I'll never forget one of my guests. So Simon, shout out to you, because he's a Simon Raybould. He's a presentation coach.
Oh yeah, I think I've met him at a networking event.
Yeah, so Simon helps people with their voice all the time, and he teaches people presentation skills. And he came on my podcast when it was audio only. And one of the things he said to me after the episode wrapped was, "You have so much anxiety." And I was so shocked. I was a new podcaster, and I'd never really thought of how much leaks through your voice. But I've also someone who's experienced a lot of trauma in my life. And also, I think now I have my ADHD diagnosis, it makes sense. But back then it was like, well, why is this leaking through my voice? And what I've come to learn myself when I'm coaching people with public speaking or confidence skills is we carry a lot here, women as well. We carry a lot of energy or stuff in our voice here, and if we're not accessing the depths of you'll put this in much more scientific ways, but if we can't access those real guttural stomach level kind of depths of our voice, we're going to be speaking from here, and that's not going to help our voice get out, right?
Yeah, well, so much of how we feel and what we experience in life comes through in our voice, whether we know it or not. Everything we've done up until this very moment has an impact on how you sound and how you use your voice, from things in your childhood, like, did you grow up in a big family where you had to shout to be heard? Did you grow up as a single child in a family who actually didn't need to work to be heard, so had a quieter voice? Did you have parents who always told you to be quiet and not speak? All these things impact. And then we go through life and we move and we meet people. I was very lucky because my voice was an integral part of what I do. So I was always quite vocally confident. But there were times at uni when I moved from Ireland to Manchester where people took the absolute mickey out of me all the time for how I sounded. And if I'd not been using my voice as a performer, I think that would have had a huge impact. And in my coaching practice, I see people a lot who come to me wanting to be louder or more expressive or more powerful when they speak, or empowered. And they tell me their voice story, and I understand why they find it hard to be louder. And for some people, it's quite an emotional experience making big sound. And for some, it's an emotional experience trying to be quieter and be more intimate with people, particularly on the microphone. So everything you experience to date is part of your voice. The thing about tension and anxiety is that it creates tension. So voice is holistic. Ultimately, it's a mind, body, voice experience. There are technical hacks to make it feel easier to speak and to have more expression and more clarity, because you've experiencing lots of tension due to anxiety or life or trauma or whatever it is. So there's also lots of lovely holistic ways. So, I've had the privilege of training with so many different practitioners, some who are like evidence-based, coming from the clinical side, going, this muscle needs this exercise, do this. And some who work with voice and the chakras, or voice and movement, or Alexander technique, or things like that. And for me, it's about understanding that all of those are valid, and you can bring all of those into a practice to help people overcome the things that they've experienced on their vocal journey. But nearly always it comes down to tension.
I honestly find this such a fascinating topic. I think it's because of the healing opportunities I see for people who have experienced trauma, or who have experienced masking themselves, or shame, or whatever they've gone through in their life. And it also makes me think about how we can interact with people. So you're on the bus and you overhear a fight, or people are arguing, or they're just not getting what they want in life. They're not getting their voices heard. I think if we were all much more aware of our voice and how we could use it in a more helpful way, that could be really powerful for people if they had that information and knowledge. So it makes me think of negotiation skills. So do you find that that's something you coach people in? Because I suppose if you change your voice and adapt it to...
I did as a voiceover we had an episode of a podcast I used to do called the Voiceover Social Podcast, all about negotiation.
Right.
And it was more about the psychological tips and tricks to negotiating, you know, like always do it on the phone, have your good, better, best, stand up when you're having the conversation, that kind of thing. I've never taught it as in voice for negotiation, but it's an interesting one. One of the people that I work with for some of my business coaching says a lot about practice saying the big numbers out loud. So, you know, when you're quoting for jobs and you have to say, well, that's X amount of thousands, or what's your budget? It's literally standing in the mirror and going, that'll be £10,000. Oh, that's a big number. And knowing what that feels like in your voice.
Yeah.
So I think it definitely comes down to empowerment. But I think when it comes to negotiation, ultimately, it's about how you feel about your service. Because if you feel like you can offer the transformation for the client's pain points, then you'll feel confident saying the number.
Yeah. I think with everyone, it's just such a journey in entrepreneurship, talking about pricing and things like that. I think for me, there's so much about wanting to create impact and give that it's been a real journey about going, actually, as I have a team and I need to feed them, you know, like it's actually being more clear around what value you give. But yeah, it's such a journey. I love what you're doing for your clients. I can really see the value of how you're helping people and even how you could help me. So I am going to have a chat with you outside of this. I think, like I say, the opportunities for people to overcome their unique circumstances, I think, and actually tap into their voice and tap into their power, so to speak, is important. And actually that connection with tension and anxiety makes a lot of sense. Something I wanted to ask you about, which we kind of touched on just over coffee before while we were doing our makeup, is so we both have very different voices. I am a South African Irish girl who is dual nationality and lives in the UK. You are a Northern Irish lass as well.
Well, but my mum's English. So
your mum is English.
Northern Irish with a mum from Manchester.
Yeah, which is awesome. And that's where you studied in Manchester as well, which is cool. And oh my God, if there was ever a city apart from Newcastle I'd want to live in, it's Manchester. It's so
a good
cool.
city. Yeah, it's great.
It is such a cultural like heaven. But but what I was going to say there is, so we talked actually about culture, and it kind of blew my mind a little bit. So I wanted to chat about it more and hopefully share with the audience. But we were talking about actually the division between religious division with Protestants and Catholics, and how you actually experienced some of that growing up yourself, and also the violence in Northern Ireland. Whereas for me, I grew up in South Africa and I saw apartheid and people literally having signs, blacks go this way, whites go this way. And that's crazy that was 1990s. So it was interesting to me that we have very different cultural experiences, but both around separation of people by a religion or by something like race. What can you share about your time growing up in Northern Ireland? I mean, how do you feel it shaped you?
It's one of those things that I think until you're removed from it, you don't really understand how it was any different or how it wasn't normal. I think it was only when I moved out of Northern Ireland and realised that other people didn't have experienced some of the things I've experienced that you sort of think, oh, that was a bit weird actually. You know, we lived in the country and my parents kept me out of a lot of it, I have to say. But we lived quite close to a town that was a hotbed at certain times of the year for certain elements, and there were some pretty intense times there. But, you know, driving from the country into the town and having to show your ID before you'd go in, for example, there's some hilarious things like my granny. There was a time in our town when you couldn't leave a car empty.
Right.
Because there might be a bomb.
Yeah.
So my granny, when she went into town to do her errands on the weekend, used to have to take one of us kids with her to just sit in the car in the morning. So one of us would be like having to go with granny on the weekend to sit in the car so that they wouldn't take the car away. And you didn't really think it was loads of like empty cars with kids in it just sat in the town, like, you're right. And she would go into the butchers and whatever and get all her things like that, or experiencing a situation where you have been in town when there's been an explosion or bomb scares and all that kind of stuff, and you just normalize it. I mean, I used to work in a shop and used to get bomb scares all the time where someone would call and go, there's a bomb, and we'd all have to leave, but we'd be like, yes, because we got a day off. You know what I mean? So there's all this stuff that actually is incredibly traumatic. Like one of my jobs at 15 was in this shop, it was a clothes shop, was checking the pockets of jeans for incendiary devices or like suspicious devices. So you'd go around before you open the shop and put your hand in every pocket to check if there was anything in there. And I'm like, £3.25 an hour to check if there's an explosive device in a pair of jeans. But you just don't really think about it. Do you know what I mean? And then you leave and you tell these stories in the pub or whatever in first year uni with all your new mates, and they're like, what? And I'm like, oh, yeah. Yeah, it was a bit strange. I think I'm very lucky in the sense that I mean, there's nobody in Northern Ireland who's not been touched by the Troubles in some way. But I think I got off pretty lightly in many ways. But my mum was English, and that was very tough for her. It was an interesting one, and it wasn't until, sometimes I think, did that make me dampen my voice a little in terms of my accent, or did that make me speak stronger and more proud? I don't really know. I've never really reflected on it too much. And a lot of Northern Irish children who grew up during that period talk a lot about kind of deep-seated trauma that we don't actually speak about. We just kind of get on with it.
And I think a lot of the time in history, stereotypically the Irish they do just get on with it. There has been a lot of hardship for Irish folks all over the world. Immigration into the US, for instance, there's many stories of the Irish being, treated terribly. That is really interesting, actually, hearing about some of those experiences. Makes me think a little about moving over from South Africa at 14 and people being like, what, you have bars on your windows, or you have electric fences, or you have guns in the house, or it's just such a different world. And I think, like you say, you normalize a lot of stuff if you've never experienced something else.
But people also, historically, people who haven't understood Irish history take the Troubles for granted and they think it's a joke. And there's a lot of, I've often had people being like, oh, you're from the north, do you have to wear a stab-proof vest everywhere? Do you have to, like, making really lighthearted jokes about it? And you're like, you don't get it. You don't understand what's happened. And Irish history is not taught in mainstream schools, and nobody understands what's actually happened and the horrific things that have been going on. So you sort of end up with this situation where, like, there are certain other horrific traumatic things that are much more widely discussed and talked about. And then you're in the corner going, yeah, but can I tell you about the time I was bombed off my chair in a dance class? You know what I mean? Or can I tell you about the time, like, my friend was killed in whatever, and it's strange, the Irish history one, because people do not understand. And because Irish people historically as well are storytellers and up for a laugh and the old crack, people just tend to joke about it. And, so it's a way to get through, but also it means people don't have the conversations that need to be had to really understand what's going on.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I'm really inspired to go and learn more about the Troubles and some of the Irish history, because, as you say, it's not taught in schools. And as someone with Irish heritage myself, I feel like I don't know anything. I'm really fortunate to have an Irish passport, but what does that mean? So my granny moved out from Moira in Belfast to South Africa, Zimbabwe actually, and she met my granddad while she was out there, and that's how my dad came to be. So we've got this connection and heritage, and I've been there, and it's one of the most beautiful places in the world, but there's so much rich history
and that's
underneath it all.
That's an interesting thing that we're thinking about with our son as well, because you grew up with having some Irish in your family and being connected to it, but actually not really knowing much about the culture or understanding it at all. My son is growing up on the Cumbria-Northumberland borders with an Irish mum and a dad from Yorkshire, but basically he sounds like a little Geordie. So, like, he's growing up as a Geordie, but actually he's not a Geordie, or is he? Like, yeah. I think it's a really interesting, and I'm sure there's lots of kids like that these days because we do so much more moving around and meeting people from different places. And I think it's really interesting that he's growing up with an accent that technically isn't connected to his cultural background at all. But he'll know about Irish politics, believe you me. He knows about the swear words because I've let him watch Father Ted. Far too young. That's the step one. He's like, I'm Irish, feck, arse, feck. I'm like, oh God, not in front of Nana.
I love that. He sounds like a right character. How old is he?
He's 8.
He's 8.
Yeah.
Awesome.
8 going on 15, you know, as they are.
Yeah.
Getting a bit of a surge of hormones.
So has having him made any difference to your career, would you say?
Yes,
Yeah.
I think so. I think it's probably one of the reasons I didn't go down the accent coaching route quite as strongly, because a lot of accent coaching, when you really get into it, is on set, traveling a lot.
Yeah.
You know, whispering in Brad Pitt's ear for 6 months on a film, that kind of thing, which was what I wanted. And then I found out I was pregnant just when I was starting the journey to being a coach. So, I literally remember standing there having, you know, with a 6 months bump, and somebody saying, can you come to Lanzarote for 4 months to be an accent coach on such a film?
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I literally can't. And that was an interesting path for me. So then I went more into drama school route and learned an incredible amount. I'm actually very grateful for that, because seeing, you know, 100 they're not children, they're 18, but 100 students through 3 years of drama school training and knowing their voices and their personalities and following that has probably been one of the most important and useful things of my career, really. Doing that twice for like 2 cohorts of students was an incredible grounding. So it definitely affected some decisions I had to make at the start. I think it's also, having a kid is probably one of the reasons I would never want to go back to having a full-time job, because I really appreciate the flexibility. Like, being self-employed is hustle, isn't it? All the time. Hustle, hustle, hustle. Where's the next job coming from? What's going on? And you can find some kind of structure in a business plan, but ultimately, you've just got to keep hustling all the time. But I would not swap that for the 9 to 5, please, Miss Boss, can I have a holiday on that day, please? Like, I can just take time off, and I love that. And now I shape my business around having all the holidays off. He's my one kid. I want to be with him until he decides he couldn't be arsed with me anymore, which is probably coming sooner than I think.
Oh.
But so I have all the school holidays off with him, and my husband's a comedian as well. So his work is a lot more responsive. If he gets a job, he has to go. If he gets a gig, he has to go. So I love the fact that I am the cornerstone of that, whatever stability is for us.
Yeah. I love that you are also married to a comedian, and you get to have, you must have the most funny household, like loads of crack.
I don't know, I always say being married to comedians is not funny at all.
Yeah, I guess.
But I know what you mean. We have a lot of fun. And the reason I fell in love with him is because we met doing stand-up. So I fell in love with him because he made me laugh.
Yeah.
So it's a big part of our identity as a couple. And our son, you know, he said the other day, he was like, Mom, you know the way people are just like good at stuff, and some people are like good at sports or whatever. And I was like, yeah, love. He was like, I've just got comedy in my bones.
Oh, how
And I was like, no, I need you to be a mechanic or an accountant or something,
like something useful to me.
Don't go into the arts. So, yeah, we have a laugh.
Yeah.
We have a laugh. But it's hard. I suppose I'm technically a creative.
Yeah.
So being 2 creatives in a relationship, trying to bring up a child, is hard.
Yeah.
It's hard.
I mean, I'm inspired being self-employed myself. And my husband too. We're at that like trenches time where it's like, oh my God, what the hell is going on? And it's, you want to speak at this, or you want to do that, or go to this event, but then how do you make that work? And
yeah, you have to make it. I'm finding now, because I'm trying to do more speaking, and I want to be out at every networking event Newcastle has to offer, because there's loads.
There's so much.
If my husband's gigging, or like he's away all this week recording a radio show, next week he's away gigging, the week after that he's recording more, like, I can't. There are things I cannot go to because I've got my child. I could probably be a certain type of mom, or a different mom, and bring him along and stick him in the corner on a switch, but like, I don't want to do that. I want to be at home with him, So yeah, there is an element of restriction, but I don't know about you. God, am I efficient with my time?
Way more than ever.
The things I can get done. Yeah. And I waste much less time knowing that, right, I've got from 9 till 3 and I get everything done.
I find it's easier to say no because I have more clarity on what my priorities are. One thing I wanted to ask you about is, you said you want to do more speaking, and I'm so excited for you, and I feel there's way more speaking coming in your future. Something I'm hearing a lot from some of my clients that I help with their speaking is there's this kind of invisible woman thing for women between 40 and 60 usually, but it's usually due to caring for kids or caring for elderly parents,
or both a lot of the time.
Or both, yeah. And it can be a sense of, I've lost myself in amongst everything else going on. And I'm just curious about how this relates to voice, and I wonder if you work with clients where you see that happening. So for yourself, wanting to do more speaking and wanting to kind of do more networking, what tips would you have for anyone in that situation where they caring for other people and there's maybe not that much time to take care of themselves? What would you do to look after yourself and your voice in that situation?
I think don't expect too much of yourself. So when it comes to goal setting, be realistic, set small goals that aren't too far ahead so that you can have small wins and little wins each step that you get onto. When it comes to the voice, I think have a bit of coaching, talk to somebody about it. Going from being a mom and a carer or someone who's been in the household a long time and then stepping out into the world again is a big change. So getting somebody to help you through that is incredibly useful. I think a lot of people think voice coaching is reserved for actors or politicians or business people. And yeah, there's an element of that. But also a lot of my clients are people who've made, maybe the kids have grown up and they've decided to make a change and now they're starting a business in that period of, 40 to 60, and they're making a big change and they just need some help feeling vocally confident. So it's not all about like singing or projecting to the back of a theatre, or sometimes it's mostly for me, most of my work is helping people own the sound that they have, find the confidence and the empowerment to get out there and use their voice in an authentic and impactful way. So I think seeking help, whether you need help with mindset or business structure or whatever, voice coaching is often overlooked as a really powerful tool when it comes to stepping out into the world again, away from that caregiving part. There's a big difference between like, hello love, what do you want for your tea, to, this is my business. That's the sort of thing I can definitely help people with.
Yeah, I'm so grateful you've shared that because, women accessing less venture capital investment. Some of the stats are pretty heartbreaking, looking at the Rose Review and things like this. I think having vocal coaching for anyone, but particularly if you're in a group that is marginalized in some way, being able to understand how you can step out from the crowd, I can see how that would be so useful.
Yeah, and I think, people always go to public speaking coaching first, which is incredibly valuable. But often it needs to start with your voice. Yeah. No matter how good your structure is, no matter how good at stories you are, you need to have confidence in your voice and know that your voice is going to be there for you. Maybe it's nerves and adrenaline. Maybe it's clarity. Maybe it's range and resonance. So I really encourage people who are having public speaking coaching specifically as well to work in tandem with a voice coach. I work a lot with people who are already getting speaking coaching, for example, although I do coach speakers too, because they've discovered there's an area of opportunity with their voice within that process. So yeah, it's a really worthwhile thing. It's also loads of fun.
It is. I mean, I can say just being a participant in workshops and observing you are so funny with a stand-up background. But you get us hydrated. That's one thing.
I certainly do. Yes, I do.
So I think, getting us up and playing and playful. There's a lot of play and mischief to working with you, which I love. So I'm conscious of time. I've got my favorite question I ask everyone.
Oh, yeah.
So what is your number one word to nurture your zest?
I was thinking about this. I think I decided on 2, but I'm not sure that's allowed.
Oh yeah, it's totally allowed. Yeah.
So the first one, as a voice coach, I'm constantly telling people that part of being a good human and being a good speaker is knowing how to listen. So I think listen has to be one of my words. As someone who communicates for a living, we also have to listen. It's such an important part. I could say some holistic things about listening to yourself and your body, which is also important. If you're feeling tense, you might need to release your shoulders to make your voice better. If you're feeling nervous, you might need to listen to what your mind's saying and try and calm it down. But just your communication will be better if you're listening and responding to the people around you, and your voice will be stronger and more engaged if you're actively listening, because then you're really fully engaged in what's happening when you talk. So I think listen has to be one of them. And my other one's just always breathe out. If in doubt, breathe out. Not my catchphrase. It's an amazing book about breathing. But we walk around holding our breath loads as humans. Often when we listen, funnily enough, we hold our breath. So just notice the times in your life when you find yourself holding your breath and just let it go.
That is absolutely beautiful and so insightful. And I'm so grateful you said that. So we've got listen and we've got breathe out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually think I could benefit so much from those two things. So I'm going to try and live that in my life today, to breathe out more. Well, thank you so much. We will have links to your book and your podcast and your vocal programs and everything. And I'm so excited to have had you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to Nurture Your Zest today. If you're feeling extra kind, it would mean so much to me if you could share this episode with your friends or family or anyone who you think might feel inspired by this content. Liking, sharing, or interacting with our content is a great way to support us as content creators, and it helps us to bring interesting stories and more people to you. This podcast is a Flamingo Heights podcast studio production, and I've been your host, Ashleigh King. If you liked today's episode, follow the video on your screen now, or check out the link in your show notes to find similar content.